Hello, this is James St. James, and in this episode we're going to be talking about the 13 major electrical channels of the human body. Let's learn about the functional anatomy of the human body from a healer perspective so that we can reverse engineer intuitive healing so that we can re-engineer our body and mind to think and perform how we want. In the last episode, we went over the 12 organs, their functions, and the emotions they are responsible for electrically producing. The organs are associated with the 12 electrical channels, with a positive and negative one for each of the 6 elements. If you've been following along since the beginning, then these should be familiar concepts for you. However, if you're just jumping in and are curious as to what I mean by positive and negative, or the 6 elements, then please check out the episodes on polarity and the 6 elements that I mentioned earlier in the series. These are the same electrical channels that I am presenting in this episode, so if you know your meridians, you will know where the electrical channels are. However, many Chinese medicine practitioners I know still don't know why or how the electrical channels work because in the Chinese medicine schools, they focus on patterns of qi, or life force energy, rather than looking at the underlying biological characteristics and functions of the individual electrical channels. Ultimately, this focus of patterns is essential and useful. However, without understanding the biological aspect, we cannot relate the electrical channels to the mechanical and the chemical properties of the body like we had covered in episode 1. For the purpose of healing or reconstructing the body as way outlined in this series, we're going to need all 3, the electrical, the chemical, and the mechanical. So, in this episode, let's go over the electrical channels and how they work. The traditional Chinese medicine literature has a very extensive documentation about the patterns of the electrical channels, which can be supplemental to the knowledge that you will gain in this video. So if you would like to learn the intricate patterns of the electrical channels, then you might want to consider picking up a Chinese medicine textbook about the pattern differentiation and acupuncture points. However, with just a few basic points of understanding of the channels, we can get pretty much everything we need to create effective self-healing therapies. We don't need a lot of complex patterns to create significant changes that actually heal the body using the methods outlined in this series. We just need to learn how to trace the damage and create strategies and healing routines to fix the damage. In contrast to the traditional Chinese medicine model, which is focused on creating balanced energy patterns, we will be focusing on fixing tissue damage. In the long run, if you make needle-sized adjustments to a damaged body, then you just have a damaged body with a more balanced electrical pattern. But when using the healing process, which is damage-focused, you can be free of damage and stress from your body and from your life, even with an unbalanced electrical pattern. And the ultimate goal is to be free of stress and damage. So I hope that through this series that you will have the tools and the information you need to be able to create healing strategies and apply them via techniques that are specific to your unique stress pattern. We all have stress, and that stress gets stored in our body, causing it to lose functionality over time. We then might feel like we aren't as athletic, our emotions aren't as vibrant, or we just don't feel or think as well as we did when we were young. So let's learn more about the body and how it works so that we can do what's necessary and practical to fix it, to restore our emotions and vitality. In the first 3 episodes of the season, we went over the 3 viewpoints of the body, polarity, and the 6 elements that govern everything in human biology. Those 3 episodes each cover one of the main fundamentals of the healing process I am presenting. We've also gone over the sinew channels, the main fascia patterns, and the organs. Now we are covering the electrical channels, which is the last topic in the series about the core structural systems of the body. The electrical channels pass waves of electricity generated by the organs through the fascia of the body. If you were to look at these channels, you wouldn't necessarily see distinct lines of electricity, since there is continuously changing flow through an intricate network of collagen. Instead, the center of each channel is roughly located where its electrical waves flow the most strongly, with the least resistance. Scientists have been studying the electrical potential differences of these subcutaneous collagen channels for decades and are certain of their existence, but only in the last 10 years or so has the measuring equipment been sensitive enough to detect these subtle differences, as demonstrated in a study as early as 2010 by a man named Dr. An and his colleagues. Even though Western science has only recently proven the existence of these barely detectable channels, over the last 400 years or so, traditional Chinese medicine has been developing and using the technique of acupuncture to create changes in the electrical patterns of the body. In acupuncture, tiny needles are placed in the skin at precise locations on the body where the electrical and sinew channels can be stimulated to affect changes in one's organ balance and mental state. So using the electrical channels to heal the body is nothing new. The last 400 years of development and refinement since the first use of acupuncture has proven it and similar electrical channel-based therapies to be actually quite effective. Generally, the electrical channels flow around the corresponding sinew channels that we covered in episode 6 of the series. Just as there were 12 sinew channels that we discussed in episode 6, there are also 12 electrical channels. Though they're not necessarily dedicated to one another, there is a positive and negative electrical channel for each element. In episode 3 about the 6 elements, I mentioned that there were actually technically more than just 6 elements. However, I said then that it would be best to ignore the 7th, 8th, and 9th elements, as they generally exist outside of the body and we're not able to do much with them. However, in this case, we'll cover just the electrical channel of the 7th element, the element of life, because it can actually be found easily, and by covering it, we can include practical ways to influence and fix it in our healing strategies. Moving on, let's look at each of the channels element by element so that we can become familiar with their locations. Let's start with the earth element. The positive and negative earth element channels span across the front side of the body and carry emotions such as care and consideration. And when the earth element organs create disturbed or inharmonious electrical impulses, the emotions show up as being compassionless or having a difficulty expressing empathy or even confusion. The water element channels span up the back of the legs and up the back of the body and the spine to the head and shoulders and carry the resonant emotions of bravery and fear, with the dissonant emotions being insecurity, shame, and even feebleness. The fire element channels go up the sides of the body, all the way from the feet to the sides of the head and also along the inside of the legs. The associated resonant emotions are peace, fun, focus, and motivation. The dissonant emotions are paranoia and frustration. The air element channels go from the thumb across the front of the shoulder, then up the neck to the temples of the head. The resonant emotions are trust, grief, and swagger, with the dissonant emotions being stubbornness and distrust. The light element channels flow along the backside of the arms and also go up the side of the head, especially affecting the jaw. Its resonant emotions are joy, sadness, and wonder. Examples of dissonant emotions are loneliness, overgeneralizing, and hopelessness. The dark element channels are on the lateral lines of the outside and inside of the body and connect to the top of the head and also the center of the chest. The associated resonant emotions are faith, love, and acceptance. The dissonant emotions are worry, hatred, and purposelessness. The 7th element is correlated with the Sahasrara or crown chakra. The positive side of the 7th element electrical channel goes up the back of the base of the S5 vertebra of the spine, or the tailbone, up the center of the back of the spine to the center of the forehead between the eyebrows. The negative side of the electrical channel that correlates with the 7th element stems from the center of the front of the sacrum, right above the genitals, and then goes up the front of the body to meet with the positive side of the 7th element channels. The associated emotion for the 7th electrical channel is bliss. It's even said that when this channel is working at its fullest, that one will experience the feeling of enlightenment. It's also proposed that each of the body's 6 primary chakras, or circular energy centers of the body in ancient Ayurvedic language, are between the negative and positive electrical channels of the 7th element, meaning pretty much along the front of the spine. This might sound kind of ethereal, but it is possible that you may have experienced some of the effects of this element and its electrical channels already. The effects associated with the 7th element activation are some of the most memorable or even desirable ones in the human experience, related closely to heightened senses of intimate connection and are often held in place of special reverence. In those moments, with all the meridians activated, the channel and chakra of the 7th element are activated, hence the feelings of blissfulness unlike any other emotion that we can experience. Now, you may remember from the previous episodes that each of the positive and negative channels have their own associated emotions. So, is bliss a positive or a negative emotion? If bliss is one of the emotions, then what is the other emotion? This is where my knowledge becomes very limited, as I have never experienced firsthand what it's like to alter this channel. So if you have any guesses, I would love to hear about them in the comments. Let me demonstrate how we can use these emotions as a reference. Let's take the positive light channel as an example. If the top back of the shoulders feels locked up, then the light positive organ, or the small intestine, will struggle to transmit its emotion, which is wonder and curiosity. Many people have tension on the tops of their shoulders, and many people have also lost their sense of wonder and curiosity for the world compared to when they were children. So, do you think that losing wonder and curiosity for the world is just a mere coincidence that happens once we've traveled around the sun a number of times? Or do you think there might be a more scientific and practical explanation, such as an electrical channel, for those specific emotions that are being locked? I say let's take the practical approach and learn about these channels so that we can unblock and restore our emotions. Each of these channels has specific points that were originally discovered and given numbers in traditional Chinese medicine. And for that reason, I personally use the same numbering system when I refer to the key points of the body. I will often refer to points such as fire positive 34 in the future. But don't feel like you need to memorize them, as I'll always show you diagrams that clearly demonstrate the exact location of the points I'm talking about. Here's an interesting note for people who are familiar with the acupuncture points and the trigger points. Trigger point therapy is strictly mechanical and based on the patterns of the fascia, whereas the acupuncture points also include the likely areas that the concentrated electrical activity from the electrical channels flow. The acupuncture points are where the spiral fascia bands intersect with the sinew channels and the electrical channels. They are actually the key intersection points for all of the three main components we've gone over in this episode and the previous 3 episodes: the sinews, the electrical channels, and the spiral fascia bands. This is why the trigger points are quite similar, but are slightly different from the acupuncture points. The points are not exactly along the electrical channels because it's more efficient and effective to apply therapies to the fascial intersections with just one point or needle in the example of acupuncture. The characteristics of the electrical channels are important to understand because the electrical patterns of the body, when destabilized, can cause the local tissues and surrounding fascia to become very fragile. If the electrical flow is disturbed, such as when the person is in a state of agitation or anger, then the areas of the fascia that have taken some damage will no longer be able to conduct the electrical current necessary to support the biological needs of the local tissue. When the collagen fibers of the fascia matrix become damaged, they not only impede the electrical waves of emotion permeating throughout the electrical channels, but they also become unable to maintain the structure necessary to sustain proper blood, nerve, and fluid flow to the surrounding tissue cells. When this happens, lightly damaged areas of the body that we can call daily stress then get worse and can eventually become permanent damage. This permanent or semi-permanent damage is eventually what leads to the stress lines that I mentioned in the previous episodes of this series. Of all types of stress in the body, that type is the most deadly or most likely to lead to disease. So this is how electrical imbalances of the channels can lead to disastrous consequences for our health and why we need to understand and care for the electrical channels in our body. Before we wrap this up, I want to give you one more example so that people might be able to relate the idea of activated electrical channels to their own experiences. There are many chemicals that stimulate the flow of electricity through the channels. Any chemical that activates the negative function of the fire organs will create a surge of electrical energy through the body and through the channels. The most accurate and safest example of this is tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC. THC is the active substance found in the cannabis plant. When people use cannabis, they generally report feeling relaxed. Relaxation is the hallmark effect of smoothly flowing electricity in the fascia and electrical channels. Relaxation doesn't just come from nowhere. It comes specifically from the negative function of the liver, and it's the function that is used primarily when we are in the deep sleep state to accelerate the natural healing processes of the body. To relax the body, the liver creates a strong flow of harmonious electricity through the fascia and all electrical channels. The chemical THC just activates the liver to increase that flow without the brain needing to enter the deep sleep state. THC is not the only chemical that can activate the liver's negative function, but it is the only one that can target this specific function without mixing too many other organ functions into it, so that we can differentiate the feelings. This makes THC a good example for identifying the unique feeling of the electrical flow of the electrical channels. So this idea of electricity moving through the fascia isn't something you just have to believe. You can experience its effects if, of course, it's legal for you to do so, and should you choose to. If you're keenly aware of your body and mind, you might even feel the differences of the unique channels using a technique I like to call self-directed emotional stimulation, or STES. STES is an important fundamental technique for the healing process. It's where we use our mind to produce a specific emotion with the highest possible intensity. Then evaluate where or what is keeping it from becoming more intense. The point of constraint that we find may be around a particular organ, or it may be in the electrical channel. From that information, we're able to trace the emotional functionality or lack thereof to the root source, so that we can fix the damage and live vibrantly with full emotion once again. Now that we've gone over all the core structures and systems used in healing the body, I wanted to give you an insight into the analysis modes and strategy development fundamentals that we'll be going over in the rest of the season of human reengineering. So this is why I brought up this example. So in summary, the electrical channels pass through the emotional energy created by the organs, and when an organ produces unharmonious emotion energy waves, the fascial matrix for the corresponding channels becomes susceptible to damage, or even solidify existing damage to make it permanent, leading to long-term stress and possibly even disease. So in order to keep ourselves resistant to stress, it's important that we maintain harmonious emotions, especially if we're trying to repair tissue like we do in the healing process. In this episode, we talked briefly about the role that electrical channels play in maintaining the tissue health of the body that protects us from taking on severe levels of stress. But what are these levels of stress? How are they affecting us? And how do we differentiate between them? Let's find out in the next episode. If you want to learn more about the body and mind, then feel free to check out the other videos in this channel or subscribe. And if you have a question about anything, then drop it in the comments and I'll do my best to answer it. I'll see you in the next video.